The reason that we put this together tonight, and I thank you so much for your support, is that we're really concerned about where education's going. We're really concerned about religious freedom, and it's something that I think we, as the people of Australia, really need to take real seriously, because we're facing legislation that's you're not being asked about, and that's one of the things that really bothers me, is that they're just saying we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we don't have a say, and they might come back at us, and or me particularly here, and say, well, we're having a voice and we're having a referendum. Well, they don't want to give us detail. They don't want to tell us what it's all about, and we know that happened with another election that we had, or another referendum, or plebiscite, if you like to say. But I'm thankful to the speakers that are here tonight. I have to give apologies for Con Cafetaris. He couldn't make it, but he has sent a video which we're going to play, and they'll go for about 15 minutes, and he's very, very interesting. So can we put our hands together? I'd like to invite Michael and Jelkovic. Did I get it right? And
good evening, everybody. How are we tonight? Who's here because they believe in religious freedom? Who's here because they believe in parental rights? And who's here because they believe in freedom of speech? Great, that's everybody. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that you're in the right place, because there's another church down the road that's having pizza, and I didn't know if you were supposed to be there. So my name is Michael Angelkovich. I'm an independent candidate. I'm an accidental activist that became a community campaigner who's become an independent candidate, and now I do some commentary as well on religious issues. So I first came across Mark when I was doing some campaigning and asked for his assistance. But more importantly, I first spoke to Mark back in April 2019, or I first watched Mark when he addressed a rally in 2019 on the religious issues in Fairfield. And that's where I also met Dr. Cafetaris, but I'll come to that a bit later on. So, having with Mark having addressed the issue of religious freedoms, he set out after the Ruddock report was held, and I'll put this down for a minute, that and religious anti-discrimination legislation was required in New South Wales, because one of the things that the Ruddock report identified was that New South Wales was the only one of two states that didn't have protection for people of faith from discrimination. So discrimination covers race and disability and gender and sex, etc., but not religious people. From there, I got involved in the Religious Roundtable conferences that Mark was holding. I acted on behalf of the Serbian Orthodox Bishop of Australia as his representative, and also the Australian Religious Alliance was formed, which was basically a group of 40 of the senior faith leaders from all the Christian denominations, Orthodox, Muslim and Hindu as well. We would get together regularly, and we were then looking to challenge both the federal legislation and the state legislation. So that's how I got involved in this whole thing. One of the reasons that we're here tonight is because from 2019 to 2021, there was an inquiry, which Tanya Mihalik will talk to you more about in her presentation, at a state level, and it was knocked back by the major parties, Liberal, Labor and the Greens. So Mark put it up. We spent over 18 months looking into it, and when it finally came to the crunch, it was knocked back. I have a petition, and so you'll see the flyers there. I'm trying to get that resurrected, and we need 20,000 electronic signatures to be able to trigger a debate in Parliament. So every signature is important. The faith groups that I've spoken to, the faith leaders, have all said, we don't want to support this at this point in time until after the election, because we want to be seen as apolitical. So because it's got One Nation in the title, they've basically put it on hold. So hopefully after the election, we've got till the 11th of May to get 20,000 signatures and trigger a debate in Parliament to give Mark a mandate to discuss religious freedom and resurrect his legislation, which the majority of the faith leaders were happy with. So the other thing people of faith should understand is in the last term of Parliament, the Liberal Party, or Alex Greenwich, who's the independent candidate for Sydney, and it's no secret that he's the gay independent and pro-LGBT candidate for Sydney, introduced the abortion bill, abortion till birth bill, and that was done with a deal with Gladys Berejiklian at the time. So, but whilst he introduced the bill, without the support of Liberal, Labor and the Greens, it would never have gotten over the line. The same thing with the euthanasia bill. So once again, introduced to Parliament by Alex Greenwich, but without the support of the Liberal, Labor and the Greens, it wouldn't have got over the line. Now we have no protection at a federal level for the religious discrimination because that was canned, and that went, version 1, 2 and 3 basically were watered down. Once it hit Parliament, it was basically taken away from being a shield or any protection for people of faith to being a sword against people of faith, effectively, thanks to the Labor and the Greens. But also at a state level, we don't have the protection. And this is a time now, with the election being just around the corner, that we can send a message to our political leaders. So send a message to Macquarie Street. Don't vote for the major parties, or if you do, put them as number 2 or 3. Vote for a One Nation candidate, if you've got one in your electorate. Independent candidate, if you've got one in your electorate. And certainly in the upper house, my votes are going to One Nation, Lyle Shelton from Family First, the Shooters Party and the Liberal Democrats. And that way, the major parties might get a message. So thank you for that. It's a great introduction. Great crowd. Good to see you here. For me, I'd just like to introduce the video by Dr. Kafataris. Now, I came across Dr. Kafataris, as I said, in April 2019 at a rally in Fairfield. I then went to another rally in Blacktown, and then I followed him to a third rally in Rockdale. By the third rally, he thought I was a serial stalker, but really I was a serial supporter, and that's what's happened over the last 4 years. I've been involved with him and the Australian Christian Alliance and also the Australian Religious Alliance over those 4 years now. And I've been blessed as well, as I said, to be able to represent the Serbian Orthodox Bishop of Australia and New Zealand and provide him with information and advice on all these sort of on all these issues as well. So without further ado, we'll hand over to the technical people and get the video going. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you for your attention. Regards to everybody. Apologies I couldn't be there because I'm helping a lower house candidate here in Sydney. Very religious, very faith-driven, and we want to see if we can get the balance of power in the lower house, God willing. So I just want to give you a bit of context as to why we're in the mess we are and the big challenges we face, particularly those of us who are people of faith. It actually begins with same-sex marriage in 2017, and even though that was passed, there were 5 million people who voted no, and many of them on religious grounds. And many of them did so because their scriptures call same-sex marriage or homosexuality as sinful. I mean, you've only got to look. You only got to look at the fact that there are 4 billion people around the world that are either Christian, Jew, or Muslim, and their scriptures call, among other things, homosexual behaviour sinful. As a matter of fact, one scripture calls it an abomination. Now, if you're as a government going to legalise something like that, where the faiths of all of a major part of your country are going to say no, it's sinful, sooner or later there's going to be a conflict. Okay, and in any conflict, the one with the biggest gun wins, and so therefore, if you don't give equal protections to religious freedom that you do to LGBT rights, there's going to be a problem. Now, some coalition MPs recognised this and tried to move amendments, but they were voted down. Okay, so then what? Mr. Turnbull, that genius ex-PM that we used to have, he commissioned the Ruddock Report. The Ruddock report found that there actually were problems with religious freedom in Australia, particularly in New South Wales. We actually didn't have a protection for against discrimination on religious grounds, and that it should be fixed. Now, did any of that get done after the Ruddock report? No. The can got kicked down the road. As a matter of fact, what did happen is attempts by the Labor Party, the so-called Penny Wong Bill, to take away the only protections that religious schools have currently in Australia and in New South Wales to create an environment that's consistent with their ethos. See, let me just be clear. We're not talking about expelling gay students or expelling teachers that may have, private struggles with their sexuality. What we're talking about is a school should be able to prevent activists coming in that actively want to undermine the ethos of the school and want to, wear the school uniform in the Mardi Gras, or want to, wear it purple days at a religious school. A religious school where parents are sending them to that school, paying good money to be taught the values of the school, should have the right to refuse to have that sort of stuff in their school. Currently, the anti-discrimination legislation allow that, because through certain exemptions, but there are moves both federally and at New South Wales level to remove that. I imagine that other speakers will talk about that, because Mark Latham has talked about that publicly before. Both Liberal and Labor and the Greens and the crossbench want to take away the rights of religious schools to do that. So that's something that you need to really bear in mind when you're casting your vote this election. Then we had the 2019 election. Immediately before that, not immediately, but before that, we had the Israel Folau controversy. Everyone knows about that. But for every Folau that publicly got vilified, there were other people that privately that were persecuted. Some people have since chosen to go public. Many others have not. Okay, religious freedom was a sleeper issue at the 2019 election, and many votes were shifted. The government then promised to bring in a religious discrimination bill, and they did that in 2019. There were three versions: version 1, version 2, version 3. Each one was worse than the other. Okay, version 1 was bad enough, 2 was worse, 3 was worse still. I was actually in the first round table with Scott Morrison, where he promised, I heard him say, when a bishop said, Prime Minister, let's say I have a school. Let's say I have a student who we love the student as a student at the school, and let's say he comes to school one day and wants to openly proclaim the fact that he has two mothers and he wants Wear It Purple Day and all that stuff. What do I do? How do I love the student on the one hand but love my God on the other? Well, Morrison said you should have the right to ask that student to leave the school. Okay, I was there. I saw it. Now, did he actually give religious schools the right to do that? No, he didn't. Now, again, I'm not saying whether a school should or shouldn't do that, but a school that wants to maintain a religious environment based on the wishes of parents who are paying fees for that school should have that right, provided they're upfront about it. Okay, I'm not a fan of keeping things under the carpet. Be upfront. So instead of following through on that permission, on that promise to give the school the right to do that, the federal bill actually took away that right. So in the end of 2021, as you probably saw that circus on the floor of Parliament, the bill basically got pulled because it would have taken away all of our rights to object, particularly those of religious schools. I now want to cover the Mark Latham bill, because Mark then, following through on his promise, introduced a private members bill that actually was a good bill. I read it. I made submissions to it. I was one of the witnesses to the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee. Both MPs from Upper and Lower House examined that bill and examined all these submissions. Mark did what the feds couldn't do. He got majority faith leader support. Okay, the majority of the faith submissions that mattered supported the bill. He also got out of more than 20,000 public submissions, 70% of people actually supported the bill or some amendments. The feds didn't get that. So Mark's bill was actually a very good bill and would have given us the protections that we needed. It would have protected people like Folau. Now, do you think that now I'll just backtrack. The Joint Select Committee, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, 14 MPs, Upper and Lower House, cross-party, Liberal, Labor, Greens, Independent, okay, all got together and they put together a report. 11 out of the 14 MPs supported supported the fact that, or agreed that New South Wales needed a bill like this and that the government should introduce a bill like this in this term of Parliament. Did the government do that? No. The bill didn't even get a second reading. I mean, that's disgraceful. That's terrible. So thankfully, Mark has agreed to reintroduce that bill if he's elected again, and I look forward to that. The next threat we're facing is the so-called conversion therapy laws. Now, those laws are actually a Trojan horse for attacking your rights to self-determination. Coercive. They say they're banning coercive practices, but those practices went out with cardigans, as Mark says. That's not my joke. That's Mark's joke. They haven't been done for 40 years. I challenge people, give me hard evidence of these sorts of coercive practices that are being done in 2023. If they are, they're assault and the police should be involved, all right? They might have been done 40 years ago, but not now. And yet we have these conversion therapy laws that are seeking to ban something that's not happening, all right? Now, the reason for it is it wants to take away parents' right to self-determination for their kids, and it wants to take away preachers' rights and churches' rights to proclaim their religious beliefs. Because here's what the laws do. Now, they're in 3 jurisdictions right now. There's one in Queensland, there's one in the ACT, and one in Victoria. Queensland was first, that was bad enough. ACT was worse, and the Victorian is the worst of all. The Victorian bill bans consenting therapy. So as an adult in Victoria, you can go and get counselling for unwanted feelings of depression, unwanted feelings of alcoholism, but if you want help with unwanted feelings of same-sex attraction or gender confusion, you can't get help. It becomes illegal. Okay, you take a child outside of Victoria to get help. Okay, that's illegal too. You publish something somewhere online that people can change their sexuality, and that gender is that people who have gender confusion can grow out of it. That's illegal as well. All right. I co-authored a study of 78 ex-gays, right, and ex-transgenders, where we looked at we broke them into demographics, and we looked at what happened to them. Some people got professional counselling, some people got no counselling, some people got religious counselling, but all of them had change. All of them, the change was positive, and all of them the change was lasting. And we actually look at the some of we've got graphs here of how long the change was, and in terms of was it beneficial? Well, 75% of them had a reduction in suicidal ideation. 93% of them had a reduction in anxiety. All right, 94% of them had improvements in self-image. Okay, 74% of them had improvements in relationships. Nearly 70% had improvements in physical health. Okay, we actually have in terms of suicide. All right, we had in terms of the reduction. When you measure it out, it was a reduction in suicidality of nearly 40%. Okay, now they talk about the fact that we need to bring in conversion therapy laws because if we don't, people will kill themselves. Well, I've got proof here that if you bring those laws in, people will kill themselves. Okay, because nearly half of these people that had this counselling may have killed themselves. All right. So what we've done is we've shown that it actually works, and I throw the gauntlet out now we're talking about consensual treatment. We're not talking about forcing people. Like I say, if you're gay and you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. All right. But if someone doesn't want these feelings of same-sex attraction or gender confusion, all right, then they should have the right to get help, just like any other consenting adult or any parents who want to get help for their children. A lot of you would be aware of the Tavistock gender clinic that was closed down because actually it found out when you studied it, the outcomes aren't good. A lot of people regret transitioning. Well, these laws would force parents to push their children towards transitioning. Another unintended consequence of these laws is that they define sexual orientation and gender identities as they say that no sexual orientation is a disorder, broken, a shortcoming, or in need of fixing. The problem with that is you've got religious doctrine that says that certain sexual or certain behaviors are a disorder. The Greek word for sin means to miss the mark. It's a shortcoming. So you've got in the Act of Parliament the definition of the bill saying it's not a shortcoming. The church teaching it is a shortcoming. Here you've got a problem again. I mean, you have Chris Minns and Perrottet saying, we'll bring these laws in, but we're not going to ban preaching. Hello? The government is not going to ban preaching, which means that they could if they wanted to. They've just decided not to. I hope you catch that. You've got a government saying what you can or cannot preach, okay? The government is saying that, they're going to let you preach about sexuality and things like that. Well, if they can let you preach it, then they cannot let you preach it in the future. And if they can decide not to let you preach about this behavior, then what else can they not let you preach about? Hopefully everybody can see the thin end of the wedge for that. So, I think that's a big, big problem. And I think that those laws are a Trojan horse to take away your rights to self-determination for treatment, to seek, for consenting adults to seek treatment, and for parents who want help for their kids. Now, the last thing I want to cover is this something that doesn't get a lot of airplay, but Chris Minns, a couple of weeks ago, said that that if he's elected as Premier, within 100 days, he will introduce laws that prohibit vilification on religious grounds. Now, just like the conversion therapy laws, that sounds good, doesn't it? I mean, who would want people to be vilified based on their religion? Look, I say to you, this is the thin end of the wedge. If people have their, yes, there are instances where women have had their headscarves pulled off and stuff like that, but they're all already covered by common assault laws. Why do we need vilification laws? Okay. The other problem is that it's in the definition. When you look at vilification laws in other jurisdictions across the country, okay, the Australian Human Rights Commission uses words like insult or offend to define vilification. All right, and they also say that the measuring stick is the individual's perspective. In other words, you say something about my religion that insults or offends me, and then my reaction, how I feel, determines whether it's vilification. All right. So how I feel determines whether you've broken the law. Right. Hopefully you can see a big problem with that. And the big problem is that they are the thin end of the wedge to take away your freedom of speech. I was asked on the floor of Parliament when I gave evidence about the Latham Bill, did I support vilification provisions? I said, no, I didn't, unless I could be, no, I said it depends on how you define it, because I'm all for protecting the individual, as I said, but I don't want you to take away my right to criticise the ideology. As I said, Sheikh Shadi and I, from the Imams Council, we're good friends. But he knows that I think Islam is a false religion, and he believes that my belief is a false religion. And we should have the right to criticise each other's beliefs in a respectful manner. Let's have a debate, and may the best man win. Religious vilification laws, depending on how you define them, will take away that right. And if you take away my right to proclaim what I believe, you take away my freedom. Okay, and so as you can see, it's the thin end of the wedge for free speech laws. Okay, again, I'm not promoting the right to say that gays are scum, or the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim, or anything like that, or Jews are this, or Sikhs are that. No, I want to protect the individual, but we all should have the right to critique in a respectful manner everybody's beliefs. That's what freedom of speech is about. And if we don't have freedom of speech, if we don't have freedom of thought or freedom of speech, then I humbly submit we do not have freedom, okay? And if we don't have freedom, we live in a dictatorship. So that's why this election is really important, because we need to make sure that good parties that protect our freedoms, like One Nation, have a real say and hopefully even the balance of power in the upper house. So thanks a lot for your attention. If anyone wants a copy of this study, please contact Colin, and Colin will contact me, and I'll get it to you. Thanks a lot for your time.
And I apologise, I'm Colin. Yeah. So that book is incredible. I've got a copy of it. And just to read the testimonies, that's what it's full of. Testimonies of people who have been gay and have wanted to change back, and they've been able to do that. The other thing is gender therapy, which is a real worry, because I don't know whether you know this or not, but gender therapy cannot be reversed. So once a person goes through a sex change, they cannot change back. It's permanent. And here they are in schools purporting to want to help people to change, and going to 7-year-olds and starting them on hormone therapy to change the way their body develops. And then there's further further invasion at age of at puberty. So whenever that happens, that's when it you know, the physical stuff really starts to happen. I mean, these things are diabolic. It's diabolic. But we need to realise that we're not fighting flesh and blood, we're fighting principalities and powers. And this is all about Satan versus Jesus. I don't know if everyone's Christian here or not. I don't know a lot of you. I do know a lot of you, but I don't know all of you. And if you're not Christian, well, thank you for coming tonight anyway. And you might not agree with all you hear, but we're just trying to expose the facts and to lay down a foundation of we really, really, really need to be dealing with the parties at this stage and finding out who is really on the Christian side. And I'm running with One Nation. I want to put it out there. I was the pastor of this church until August last year when Daniel, who's up there on the back desk, took over, and he's doing a great job. But I've asked him if it's okay to use this venue to do this. And so it's great that you're here tonight. I thank you for your support. But, you know, we need to resist this stuff. And Christians, don't be muted by the fears that people would put out upon us. Have you noticed the fear that's put out there? Hands up those who know what they can and can't say now. It's obvious. I always say, I've said this for years because I've been aware of control spirits for a long time, and you always know when you're with a control spirit because without any particular communication, there's a spirit that you realise you can't say certain things to the person. So, you know, you've got to say what they want you to say or there's no deal. Well, that's exactly what we're fighting here. It's control. And control is witchcraft. Did you know that? That's what witchcraft is all about, casting spells, all that kind of stuff. And anyone who doesn't believe there's witches around casting spells, I'm not trying to get into super spook stuff, but it really is there. And the kingdom of darkness is really there. And so we need to be aware of those things. What Con said is so true. You know, they're trying to stop us as Christians from preaching. They want to shut down churches. You know, we're looking at becoming underground churches because the only churches that are going to be allowed to exist are the churches that agree with the government. And we already have churches out there, even within a 5-kilometre radius of here, who are that kind of church. And we need to wake up and be aware. We really do. And I know that some Christians have said to me, well, Romans 13 says you submit to the government, you know, and you know what? God never told us to submit to corruption, ever. We are to resist corruption. And that's what this is all about. It's darkness. And so, please think about who you're going to vote for in this next election. And I'm giving you a little plug for One Nation, okay? I'm putting it out there. They're the only party that's standing up for Christians. Now, Mark Latham, who Con mentioned, and you'd all know who Mark Latham is. He's not a Christian, but he's out there protecting Christian beliefs and protecting the church. And so it's Pauline Hanson. I mean, there's no other party that I know of that is so Christian in its ethic and yet is not Christian. But there are a lot of Christians who are running, I can tell you, for One Nation in this next election. So look, you vote. I'd fight for your right to vote against me. I'd fight for your right to vote for whoever you want to vote for. But please, think about this election because things could change. And these governments just think once they're in, they can do whatever they like and blow you, Jack. It doesn't matter about you and what you think. We know what's best for you. And we're going to do what's best for you. The trouble is, it's not best for us. It's worse for us. And, you know, hopefully we never get there, but who knows? We might have to become an underground church like they do in lots of other countries around the world. But anyway, I've got Joel Jamal here from Turning Point, and it's great to have you here, Joel. And let's give him a hand as he comes to share.
Hello everyone, how are we? So be brutally honest with me. How many of you have never seen my eyebrows in your life? All right. So, all right. 1, 2. Wow. Wow. I'm actually surprised. It blows my mind sometimes the reach of online. So yes. Well, I guess I don't have to introduce myself mostly, but to those of you that don't know me, my name's Joel. I run Turning Point Australia. I used to come from the construction industry. I know most of you already know this, but I lost my job during 2020 due to the lockdowns. It's funny because I'm just talking to you. It's because I'm just talking to the one person that didn't know me. When it comes to the lockdowns in 2020, it really thrust me into politics, and people like Dr. Con Kafataris, one of the very early people to educate me on politics. And the topic of religious freedom, Con didn't say it, but it is our battle of Britain. If you can't pick what you believe, you have no freedom of conscience. If you have no freedom of conscience, you can't say what you want. And Con's not an overly crazy person. He's quite a mild person, in my opinion. And what he's proposing and those conversations that he has with Sheikh Shadi, they're very reasonable discussions to be able to have. And so there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. Now, yeah, we do have an election coming up. And over the last few years, I've accrued a number of, I've only got a short period of time, so sorry if I come across a little bit out there, but for efficiency's sake, I love educating people about elections. I love teaching people who's punching them, why are they punching them, and how to punch back, most importantly, figuratively, of course. And it's very clear that what's happened is we've abdicated our responsibility. We screwed up. Now, I'm only 26. I turned 26 a couple of days ago. But my parents, Middle Eastern, they didn't actually engage in politics. They didn't join a political party. They didn't get their vote right. They just voted Labor Liberal because that's just what their parents did. And the challenge is that's not how you get good policy. Jordan Peterson has a phenomenal rule in his new book. It's called Where Responsibility's Been Abdicated, Opportunity Lurks. If we don't seize the opportunity as Christians, as people of conviction, then the bad guys take it. And they get it for a quarter of the price. We didn't even put up a fight. Well, that's what's been happening over the last 30, 40, 50 years. They've just been slowly tapping away at us. Now, in Sydney, we're a little bit blessed because we've had a huge influx of immigration. We've got a lot of Christians, a lot of Muslims, and it's been really good to see that there's that family unit that's been really held strong. My dad was Syrian Orthodox Christian and my mum was Maronite Christian. And Southwest Sydney over the last couple of years has had it pretty rough. I'm sure Tanya, being from the area and a member there, would understand. The 12 LGAs of concern was a big wake-up call. We're going to pick 12 local areas. We're going to lock them down. Oh, and by the way, and they never said this, these happen to be the exact same areas that voted no on same-sex marriage. Did you pick up on that? I bet you didn't pick up on that. And this is the thing. Around the whole country, I think it was 12 out of about 15 or 16 areas that voted no. They were in southwestern Sydney. That is the future right there. It is people with strong family values, people of Christian conviction. I'm glad to have the Muslims along for the ride. That's great for once. But when it comes to what's going on in southwest Sydney, we're seeing that a lot of areas like this. I love venturing out of Sydney because I meet great folk like you guys. But one of the challenges we've got is we're being faced with a political problem. And that means we need a political solution. There are a number of parties running in this election of conviction. The shooters, for example, they're not running in this area, but they did vote for Mark Latham's bill. But I didn't see the shooters putting the bill up. That was Mark Latham that put it up. And I didn't see the shooters, advocating super hard against abortion. I saw Tanya Mihalik. And so, in terms of a track record, One Nation's there. They've already been doing it for 4 years. And as Dr. Con alluded to, the balance of power, and just out of curiosity, no shame in this, does anyone not understand what the balance of power is? Because I'm happy to explain it. Oh, everyone understands it. That's good. That's very good. Well, essentially, for those listening online, because, by the way, thousands of people are going to be listening online to this recording, so don't worry about the room. The balance of power, every time legislation gets passed, it's got to go through the lower house and the upper house. Now, the way the upper house works is if I vote for One Nation in Sydney, it gets added up with your vote up here around Swansea. And if you get 4% of the vote, 4.5%, about 230,000 votes, you get another Mark Latham. You get another Tanya Mihalik. And so in this election, we're actually on track to get the balance of power. And it's going to be really entertaining because it doesn't matter if Dominic Perrottet or if Chris Minns is the Premier. They're going to constantly be on the phone with Mark Latham, who's obviously going to be the leader with regards to that. And he's going to be calling the shots. So with regards to abortion law, with regards to freedom of conscience and the Battle of Britain that Dr. Conn talks about, that is exactly what Mark Latham will be doing. When he didn't have the numbers, he proposed a bill. He did it anyway. And I have no doubt, even though he's not a Christian, I still have faith. I think he's going to come around. Keep praying for him, keep praying for him. But it's really funny because if you look at the Bible, God does this funny thing, especially in the Old Testament with the Jewish people. Whenever the Jewish people aren't doing what he says to do, he always gets a non-Christian to show them. Like, I'm reminded of the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, Reverend, but I am reminded of when the Jews were in exile in Babylon, and Cyrus came from Persia and he crushed the Babylonians, and then he ended up sending the Jews to go rebuild their temple. It's just that you see these stories in the Old Testament of a non-Christian come in and doing this, and I often talk to Con about this, and that's what I see. So we do believe in the same values. We do believe in these parties that are running. So how do we fight back? How do we make a difference for the first time in 40, 50 years of not being involved? Well, obviously, first and foremost, and this is the easy part, vote One Nation in this area. You've got an excellent candidate running in the lower house. You can vote for One Nation in the upper house as well. And I strongly encourage you to continue voting for other conviction parties so that your vote flows. But when it comes to what's going on after that, voting is easy. Have conversations. Talk with people around. If you really can, and this is something that the candidates are always on the phone with me, around the state, from all of the parties, they say, Joel, we need volunteers. We need it 2 hours, 3 hours, here or there, at the polling place. Because when you go and vote, you're handed how to vote cards, which show you how to vote for the lower house, but more importantly, how to vote for the upper house. And these volunteers, they are the ones that do the grunt work. They are the ones that get the upper house people elected. It's not Mark Latham and Tanya Mihalik. They set the vision, but the actual work is on the ground. That's how we get it done. And it's not a disrespect thing. It's a team effort. If we start doing this and if we end up getting the balance of power, I guarantee you this state is going to overnight basically become the Texas of Australia. We've already seen 200,000 people move up from Victoria to New South Wales to Queensland for a better life. It's not that hard to beat Victoria, but there it is. But that's how you make a difference. So I strongly encourage you, I don't know if there's forms at the back, but find a candidate, find Colin and the lower house candidate here as well, Pietro, and give them your details. Let them know that, hey, I've got a couple hours here. Early voting, as Colin said, it starts this Saturday. It goes for about a week, and there's only 1 or 2 polling booths, and there's only 30 to 50% of people that vote over the next week, and then there's, of course, election day. Look out for yourself. Only give what time you can. And if you want to see anything from me, any commentary from what I do, I encourage you to look me up on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Joel Jamal, or Turning Point Australia. And I've got a ton of different educational graphics which can help you identify, especially in the lower house, which parties are running for your policies. This is a policy matrix, for example. And also, there are some areas, unfortunately, we can't have a One Nation candidate in every area. In the electorate of Swansea, for example, there's a candidate with similar values. Unfortunately, we don't have One Nation there, but there is a Liberal Democrats person running there. And so we're on the dividing line where we are right now. So some of you might be in Swansea. Keep an eye out for them. But remember, One Nation, number 1, and the other conviction parties, number 2. And these graphics can help you. That's all I've got to say. I hope it was short and sweet. And I want to thank the organisers for this event. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joel. Great stuff. Yeah, we are in One Nation. You might have noticed Mark Latham is not saying, he's not preferencing anybody. And the reason is that he wants you to have the privilege of deciding who else to vote for. And, as long as you give One Nation a 1, then you'll get some steak knives and possibly a trip to Tasmania. But certainly he's standing up, and it's great to have Tanya here today. And I might just, I love her story. I love the fact that she defected from the Labor Party. And it's not that, she suddenly changed her mind. It's that she had these values and she saw that the Labor Party is similar to Mark's testimony, actually, isn't it? That Mark defected from the Labor Party years ago, and Tanya has done that. And I already checked with her that it's okay for me to say that, so hopefully I'm not crossing the line here, Tanya. But let's give Tanya Mihalek a hand, and she's number 2. She's number 2 in the upper house. So.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Colin. What a lovely introduction. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly an amazing, pleasure and to be here tonight, and an honour to be here as well. And to be with such wonderful speakers. And can I just say to you, Joel, at 26, if you can speak like that, imagine what you'll be like in a few years' time when you're my age, in your 40s. So well done, because I think for many of us in the room, it's always wonderful to hear young people that are articulate, that are of faith, and that are active and proudly so. So I think that's wonderful. Can I also acknowledge, of course, and I do want to acknowledge Colin, Pastor Colin Grigg, but also our candidate, our number 4 candidate for One Nation. And thank you, Colin, and to your wonderful wife, Deb. It's been a pleasure to come to know you in recent months. I hope that we can pull you across the line, because you will be a wonderful parliamentarian, Colin. You're exactly the person that we need in New South Wales Parliament. So I think there is a good feeling out there at the moment. I've been going around to different seats in different parts of New South Wales, and I'm hearing the frustration that people are having with the major political parties. And often when they see that I'm handing out One Nation, people will come up and talk to me and say, I'm going to vote One Nation this time because I've had enough, and I think One Nation actually stands for something, and it does. So I think I'm holding out hope and prayers for you, Colin, because I think if we can get the number 4 up, imagine that, we will have somebody of your calibre in the New South Wales Parliament, which we desperately need. Can I also acknowledge Petro Di Girolamo, our candidate for Wallsend, and I had the pleasure of meeting Petro and the many other Hunter One Nation candidates early on, as I originally joined back in January, and I've only been a member of One Nation since January. And I have to say, I've had the pleasure of meeting some wonderful One Nation members and supporters, and it's been a great honour to meet people who have a real interest in improving society and our community. They're not there for political power, which is what I'm used to, having come from the Labor Party, where it's all about power. I'm actually meeting people who have a deep interest and love in our country, and they want to see families and people prosper. Can I also acknowledge, of course, Pastor Daniel and his wife Tammy, and thank them for allowing us to have this wonderful event here at their church. Thank you so much. And to all the parishioners that are here today, thank you as well for being able to use your church tonight for such an important event. Very quickly, my background, I was in the Labor Party for almost 27 years. And I know what you're thinking, because people get less for murder. And I often think about that. It was a very long time that it finally clicked to me that I had enough of the Labor Party. I spent a number of years in Parliament. I was the member for Bankstown up until about 2 weeks ago for almost 12 years. So I was a lower house member in the seat of Bankstown, as Joel quite rightly said, an area that was impacted by the lockdowns, and a highly religious area, which was a great, wonderful community to support, but also an area that had its challenges, particularly when it came to lower socioeconomic issues, but also a whole vast of challenges that are often posed because it was an area that was neglected by the Labor Party and indeed neglected by the Liberal government in recent years as well. So I was a mayor as well, and I was on council, so I originally joined Bankstown City Council, and I joined the Labor Party at the time that Paul Keating was my local member and was the Prime Minister of Australia. So it was a time when the Labor Party, in my belief, actually stood for something back then, when you had Prime Ministers like Bob Hawke and Paul Keating advocating economic policy. They thought about economics, they thought about Australia's standing on the world stage. They actually had real vision for Australia, and they were worried about jobs and job security and wages and so forth. They never talked about the social engineering that you hear that the Labor Party talk about now, okay? They didn't talk about that. They accepted people of faith. In fact, I remember my first branch meeting, just about everybody in the room was a Christian, okay, or had a faith. And you didn't have to be embarrassed to have a faith in the Labor Party at that time. That's not the case now, and in recent years I started to feel that the Labor Party is completely incapable of representing people of faith. Okay, it is completely incapable, and sadly the Liberal Party is getting there too. They are now so driven by woke left-wing agendas and so controlled by that that they're not prepared to stand for people who have a faith, or stand up for people who have a faith. And that's very difficult, and I can understand the frustration that people have had for many years now with the major political parties. I saw this with the abortion debate. I was a Labor Party member, a backbencher at the time, and I voted. I wasn't going to vote for that legislation, and I stood there with a number of other Labor and Liberal and other independent colleagues fighting to stop this legislation to come through. It was very difficult. It was a given that there was a deal, clearly a deal had been done, okay, by the major political parties to allow that legislation to come through. And it was proposed by Alex Greenwich, who's the member for Sydney, and all of this type of legislation in recent years has been introduced by him, okay, and he has a cross-party, a group of cross-party members that help to ensure that whatever legislation he's proposing gets through the Parliament. And euthanasia was the next big legislation that I also tried to stop, but we just didn't have the numbers on our side, okay? When you looked at the Labor-Liberal Party coalition of left-wing members from both parties, they had the numbers, and they worked with Alex Greenwich to make sure this type of legislation was passed. At no stage was anyone ever talking about, let's hear what the public want. We had a huge rally. At the time of the abortion legislation, we had a huge rally outside of tens of thousands of people that stood there in Martin Place saying no. But did the politicians listen to that? No, they didn't. Okay. Did they conduct, surveys of their local community? No, they didn't. They didn't take an interest in what their community would actually think about their view on that. They didn't. We tried to get with euthanasia some interest to conduct proper surveys and views and consultation of the public. No, there was no interest. In fact, when the bill, in both cases, when these legislation or pieces of legislation were brought to the Parliament, it was already prepared and written and done and dusted. And the mover, in this case Alex Greenwich, never actually agreed to any of the amendments, okay? And all of the people that backed him from both Labor and Liberal, and the Greens, of course, that's a given, did not even consider or accept or even pretend to consider any of the other amendments that were being proposed, okay? And it just tells you, it's disheartening, because when you look at the census, New South Wales is a state where the vast majority of people identify as having a faith, okay? We're actually the most religious state in the country. We're traditionally conservative people in New South Wales, but you wouldn't know when you look at the Parliament in New South Wales. You wouldn't know. It's hard to believe that there's a Liberal government at the moment and has been for 12 years. You wouldn't believe it, would you? You would have thought that the 16 years before with Labor that there's just been an extension of that, because I can't see the difference with with the two major political parties when it comes to issues of faith. And the Religious Freedom Bill, or the Anti-Discrimination Amendment, Religious Freedom and Equality Bill, that was proposed by Mark Latham, gave both the Labor and Liberal Party an opportunity once again to demonstrate that they completely disregard people of faith. I was sat on that inquiry, and of course back then I was a member of the Labor Party. I only resigned last year in October, and I was given, I was probably lucky at the time with a different Labor leader that they didn't stop me from going on to that committee, so I was able to vote how I wanted to vote. I didn't have to ask the Labor Party their view, and of course I voted with Mark Latham, and there was 11 of us out of the 14 that voted to direct the government that they had to put this legislation through into Parliament. There was a terrific response from the public about religious freedom. We had almost 20,000 people respond to the survey, and as Dr. Con mentioned earlier, it was actually almost 75% of people supported the legislation, with about 5% wanting some amendments to the legislation. And we had enormous support from religious leaders across the state, from different communities. So Christian, of course, Muslim and Jewish, a whole array of different religions that wanted us, that really supported this change, this legislation. And sadly, and it's not surprising, that the government turned around and said, well, we will support the legislation coming through, but we're just going to wait for the federal government, knowing that there were a whole plethora of issues at the federal level, which would have meant that there was almost a certainty that this wouldn't be passed. And in the end, they voted down that legislation. So the major political parties did not allow this legislation to proceed in New South Wales. And as Mark has made it very clear, Mark Latham, One Nation, will reintroduce this legislation in the next Parliament, as we will with parental rights. And I want to talk a little bit about parental rights, if I may, because we're very concerned about education. I think many of you in the room would have children, grandchildren, family and friends where you would be definitely worried about the education system in New South Wales. And you'll be worried for a couple of reasons. One, we know the academic levels are falling in New South Wales. There's no doubt about that. We believe very firmly, One Nation, that education should be about teaching the fundamentals, okay? How about teaching literacy and numeracy? History. It is extraordinary to me what goes on at schools. I've got 3 children. Like a lot of parents, sometimes you just roll your eyes what is actually being taught at schools, and parents are definitely being alienated from their schools. They're being invited to be part of canteen duty, okay, sure. They're being invited to bring tissue boxes and crayons, and other little incidentals when they run out at school. But when it comes to actually having a say about the curriculum or having knowledge about what's being taught that isn't academia, they're not given access to that. And it's making it harder and harder. I know a lot of my friends, they're trying to go into religious schools, and they're also homeschooling. And I'm sure everybody here would know somebody that's homeschooling, because you start to worry about what your children are being taught. There is an agenda out there. There's a lot of left-wing indoctrination. We've made it clear that we don't not support gender fluidity and these type of issues being taught at schools. Why can't we just let kids be kids? How about that? I grew up, as many of you would have grown up, where we could have just, you learnt the basics at school, you played in the playground, you drew pictures, of mum and dad, a man and woman getting married. You read fairy tales. I don't think they even read fairy tales at schools anymore because they're banned, aren't they? So there's just so much pressure on these kids now, and parents are being alienated. I support the parental rights bill that One Nation proposed previously, and it's been prorogued now because of Parliament it's lapsed because Parliament was prorogued. But we will reintroduce that too again. We need parental rights in New South Wales. We need parents being at the table, determining and deciding what their kids are being taught. And we need teachers being teachers, not politicians, okay? If they want to be a politician, they can do what I'm doing and nominate, okay? And it's not easy. And you go out there and you talk to people and you nominate. And as is Colin and Petro and others, and Michael as well, an independent in Liverpool, that's what you do. If you want to be a politician, you actually show your cards and you let people know at school, at the Department of Education, and know that you're running as a politician, but you don't play politics at school. So I think, and look, obviously I'm going to plug One Nation here tonight, but there are a number of Conservative parties that are on the tickets for the upper house for this election. In fact, we've got a lot of different groups running for the Legislative Council and individuals. But I say to you, I made a conscious decision in January this year to come into One Nation, because I've just see One Nation as finally being the party, the mainstream party, that will advocate for common sense policies. And I think it's been a blessing for me to come to know so many supporters of One Nation, people who really care about how Australia is travelling, what our future holds. And Mark Latham and Rod Roberts, they've just been two of them in the last 4 years. It's only been two of them in the last 4 years, and yet they've moved so many pieces of legislation. They've moved so many amendments to help people. With the energy bill, Mark Latham moved 85 amendments to stop the nonsense that the Liberals were proposing. Okay? All of them, of course, voted down by the Liberals and Labor, and now you're seeing the price hike, and you would have heard today about the price hike for electricity. But we've got to stop this sort of madness, because we're experiencing real cost of living pressures. We're experiencing an education system at a time now where people just roll their eyes. Can they really send their kids and grandkids to school?
That's right.
And we're also experiencing, as people of faith, that sort of stigma, and we shouldn't have that stigma. You know, as Mark says, the 4 glorious words, I am a Christian, is now demonised, okay? And it shouldn't be demonised at all. It's demonised by the media. We saw that disgusting issue a couple of weeks ago. I don't want to repeat it, from the Project, Channel 10, and there was a great rally on Saturday with a number of people out there protesting the Project, where they allowed Christianity to be mocked on national TV. Just outrageous. That's why we need legislation like the Religious Freedom Bill. We need to reintroduce that, but we also need solid, strong people that aren't afraid to speak up, okay? And that's why I've been so proud to work with someone like Mark Latham, who's a very strong person. And I really want to see people like Colin Grigg get up, because Colin, if we can get that number 4 up, we only need to get 3 up, and Colin will come in through Mark's remaining 4-year term, okay? So please don't, every vote counts at this election, every vote counts. And the upper house will be, as Joel says, the balance. It's a house of review. It's where we can stop the madness, okay? As they move, and it's likely, you're going to likely see a Labor Greens sort of coalition in the lower house. I've got to say, things aren't looking too well for the Libs at the moment, and partly because they've vacated the social and economic conservative space in New South Wales. And there are people desperately wanting to vote that way, but the Liberals have said, no, we're going left with Labor and the Greens. And that's why One Nation at the moment is doing well, and why there are other right-wing groups doing well as well, because people are desperate for social and economic conservative policies and values in this state. So I thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today, and I thank again Colin and your team here. I think we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. Is that right now, Colin? So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
I'll take a seat. Hi, Joel.
Good. Can I ask the first question?
You sure can.
This is for Tanya, actually. This is a good one, because I know you guys need some warming up. Think about your question. We want to hear from you next. So on the weekend, you're at the protest. A lot of Christians, a lot of Maronites. What did the media take as the story? What was the story out of it?
I didn't actually watch the mainstream media that day, Joel, because, well, it was about Fred. That's right. Poor Fred Nile collapsed that day. You might have seen he fell. He's okay, so he is okay, but he's obviously 88 years of age, and the media's attention turned to that. But also they turned to the fact that they made a mockery of the number of people, and they incorrectly said that there was only a few people, which was wrong. Okay, it was clearly wrong. And they were so concerned about this rally that there were so many police officers. And I thought to myself, as a member for Bankstown, as the former member for Bankstown, that I often would struggle to see police in Bankstown, okay? All right? And I remember one time, and this is a true story, I've got to mention this, we had a bloke murdered at a cafe, okay, in Bankstown. And on that day, I think I saw finally about 8 or 12 police turn up. But yet there were more police officers at this rally, okay? And I thought, how absurd. What are these Christian people going to do? Nothing. They're not going to hurt anybody, okay? They were there with prayers, with icons, with rosaries. It was an incredibly peaceful rally, but that response to have a ridiculous number of police officers, okay, that have got other work to do, okay, more important work to do, and Joel's right, that the response and the media response was to essentially make a mockery of it. And I've stopped watching Channel 10. That's why I said I don't know what the response was, because I'm not going to give them that, let's stop the ratings.
You probably saw it yourselves on the news in the last week, but there's a lady in England who was silently praying outside an abortion clinic. And she was arrested, and then the next week she was arrested again. And they had video this time of her being arrested, and the cops are saying, well, you shouldn't be here. And she said, I'm just praying silently. And, while I was watching this story, I couldn't help but think, what are they afraid of? They're actually afraid of us. They're afraid of us, and they want to lock us down and shut us up and do all that sort of stuff. And what did Jesus say? The Great Commission was to go and teach all nations. And that's what our calling is as Christians, is to share the gospel. And so, we don't want to submit. We don't have to submit to people who want to shut us down. And actually, you were at the Church and State in Queensland, and it was pointed out, I can't remember the professor's name, but he was talking about our right to protest. And we have a legal right to protest. When the police were bullying people and punching them and even punching reporters, it's just disgusting. And I think they should be brought to account. I think they should all be brought. And the people who have lied to us and led us into control, they need to answer. And you know what? The church has really let go of its calling, because we are to speak to the government and to tell the government what they should be doing. Okay, I'll say enough. Do we have another question? Please don't speak before Daniel gets to you. Thanks, Daniel, for doing this. When you're the senior pastor, this is the kind of thing you have to do,
Mostly directed at Tanya, but as a pre-service teacher, I've worked in both the public and the private system as a high school teacher in science. And I have to document every single thing that I teach from the syllabus with the outcomes that says exactly, explicitly what I'm teaching. I have to keep all of that on record in case I'm ever asked, what am I teaching the kids? The syllabus itself is about to come under another review. They're changing it again. And to my knowledge, they're not introducing any more basic literacy, numeracy, science. It's more of this woke rubbish and more of this, why do I have to bring up in my classroom where we're talking about sex, gametes, all that sort of stuff that comes down to there is only male, female, because it's science. Why do I have to create a space that says, unless you're XYZ or anything else? I'm not allowed to have that position as a teacher. I have to teach politics. It is now written into our syllabus. So how do I fight that when I become a real teacher next year?
How incredible is it that, You know, they have men becoming women and women becoming men, and yet we all have about 37 trillion cells that make up our bodies, and every one of those cells screams out your sex. Because if you're a female, you have an XX chromosome. If you're male, you have XY. So it doesn't matter what you do to your body, that's the sex that God gave you, and that's the sex that you have.
Yeah, can I thank you for that point that you've made, and congratulations on the work you're doing. And I'm glad that you're a teacher, got to say, that's great. I have to say that's part of the reason what you've mentioned is why Mark and One Nation want to bring back school inspectors, okay? Because it's really important. Now that the Liberal government back about 10, 11 years ago allowed principals to have full control of schools or their particular school, and so much power was given over to the bureaucrats, it's so hard to know what kids are being taught. There are a whole host of syllabus reviews, and the department and the bureaucrats have immense control over this, okay? And there are teachers crying out that can see that sort of indoctrination happening, and they're raising concerns, but who's listening? Because it's not the major political parties. They're both controlled by the bureaucrats, okay? Neither a Labor government, certainly Labor Greens government won't do it, but even the Liberals have been there already and they can't manage this. They're too afraid to rock the boat, so to speak. They're too afraid to hear the teachers that are raising these concerns. When Mark has chaired a committee at Parliament, it's worth having a look at some of the amazing work that he has done as a committee chair in this space, where departmental people are being interviewed, particularly budget estimates too, and they can't answer the basic questions. You know, they're too afraid of being PC, politically correct. And if you've got the heads of departments or their education department like that, what hope is there for ordinary teachers out there that are desperate just to teach, a proper curriculum? So I say to you, don't be disheartened, because we need more teachers like yourself, okay? Don't give up the industry. And that's why it's so important to keep up the fight. That's why I've stayed in politics. I could have resigned last year and just said, you know what, I'm going to go. It's all been very difficult and it's been really hard on my life. But I thought, no, I've got to stay. I've got a purpose. And I know you've got a purpose too. So I do encourage you, thank you everybody, to stay on. But I'll say this, that's why it's so important to have parties like One Nation, because I look at the work that Mark Latham has done. It's actually he as the committee chair that's exposed a lot of this, okay? Because neither of the major political parties wanted to go anywhere near education. They didn't want any of this stuff exposed.
One of the other points that I'd like to make in speaking with a number of people, many people don't know and don't understand why the major parties are so close together. And the reason is that they've got a cross-party coalition or bench where members from the Labor Party and members from the Liberal Party get together behind closed doors and turn around and work out these things before they ever come to light. So it's only the fact that parties like One Nation and Mark Latham stand up, particularly in the upper house, and are there to block this madness, that we can actually rely on the democracy actually working. The fact is, democracy is being white-anted behind the doors of power in Parliament House because of these cross-party committees that are being formed, and where agreements are being made behind closed doors and deals are being done behind closed doors on issues like abortion, which we've seen, euthanasia, or what are they calling it? VAD. Yeah. Voluntary assisted dying. And now we're seeing it with the conversion therapy bill, which both parties have said that they'll bring in, and vilification laws, which both major parties have said that they'll bring in, and they've been promoted by our so-called, the independent member for Sydney, who has used his balance of power quite effectively to lobby the major parties on these issues, and without whose support he would not get these bills up and running. We need to change this dynamic, and that's why we need to vote in good Conservative candidates. Thank you.
If I could ask Tanya, then Colin, what are the 3 issues closest to your heart that you'd like to see get passed with legislation next Parliament if you could wave a magic wand?
Well, definitely religious freedom bill. I worked very closely with Mark and the other remaining committee members, except for the 3 that were difficult, one being a Labor shadow minister at that time who's since decided to retire, Alex Greenidge, of course, the member for Sydney, and a Greens member, Jenny Leong, who were vehemently, they were only on that committee clearly to stop this, okay? So I would definitely be part of that and make sure that we reintroduce that and get it passed. If we're in the balance of power, well, guess what? Puts us in a position where we can actually make it clear that we want this legislation passed, along with the, something like almost 20,000 people that made it very clear they wanted it passed too. Almost 200 submissions were made, of which the vast majority of people supported this. The vast majority of stakeholders and religious and institutions as well that wanted it passed. So that's something very close to me. Parental rights, clearly, definitely, okay, and any kind of legislation where we can tighten up the type of indoctrination that's happening at schools. So that for me is something that I'm definitely going to be passionate about. I'm also very passionate about, and it's a little bit slightly different, but I was the Shadow Minister for Natural Resources for the Labor Party, and I do care deeply about the natural resources industry in New South Wales, okay? I think, and I want to be in that space as well, because I think we've got an abundance of wonderful supplies of natural energy here and resources. Yeah. And we should be tapping into it,
That's
okay?
it. Amen.
And I'm tired of this, what I call the race to the bottom with this 100% renewables, okay? Because it's not about supporting ordinary families or ordinary people at all. It's creating this industry, and big money industry, okay, that is going to make it really tough for pensioners and for people doing it tough to even switch on their lights, let alone the heating or air conditioning in their homes. So I think it's absurd that we have a country, or particularly a state like New South Wales, so rich in resources, and it's not just in coal and gas and nuclear, but also in forestry. They even want to attack the forestry industry. Look what happened in Victoria, they shut it down. If you want to build a home now and you need timber in Victoria, guess where you're importing the timber from? Overseas, but also New South Wales, because we've still got it open. But that will be the next industry that will be attacked. So we've got to be mindful that there's so much in this space that we need to be concerned about at this election. This is a really critical election, I've got to say. We're at a turning point, which, using your point, Joel, but we are, okay, or at a crossroads. This is an election that's really important, how you vote.
The question was to me as well, I understand. Look, building on what Tanya's already said, and I've mentioned this quite a lot lately as I've been speaking around New South Wales, is that why are fuel prices so high? Why are electricity prices so high? Now, you'd look at that and think there's a strategy behind this, and it's to drive the middle class into poverty. Because people who have no money have no power. And so aside from fighting for religious freedom, which is, I think, because I've had a life, of being a pastor and knowing the good that Christianity brings. If you look at any country that was established as a Christian country, they're the prosperous countries. They're the ones with the money. People get upset about talking about money as Christians, but we prosper when we serve Jesus. And, I've got kids and grandkids, and I care about their future. And especially my grandkids, they're so young and so reliant on their parents and the future government. I'm really raging mad, to be honest with you, the way things are going. And we really need to show our will through this election. And,
why would you, sorry, I was a Liberal voter for many years. Why would you vote for a party that's stabbing Christians in the back? They're traitors. They've stabbed you in the back. I had this argument with someone who wanted to revive the Liberal Party the other day, and I said, why would you want to revive the Liberal Party or even vote for the Liberal Party in this election just because you want them to revive in another 20 years? I said, you need to vote for a party that's actioning things now. We don't have time to stand around and think about it because that's just going to lead us into a worse situation. But I don't believe that the prices of fuel... Australia's got enough fuel for our population. Why do we pay OPEC prices? That's where we need to stand up. And as Tanya said, we've got resources like crazy and we don't use them. We've got uranium, we've got coal, we've got all of these things. We really lack for nothing. We're idiots, I'm sorry. We are idiots. We give away the good that we have, iron ore, deposits of iron ore. We sell it to Japan and China and they manufacture it into steel and then they sell the steel back to us at full price. We sell it for about, it used to be 2 cents a tonne. I don't know if you know any updates on that. But, you know, these are things that we need to... I filled up my car today. It cost me $93. I've got a 4-cylinder car. And I'm thinking, this is just disgusting that I'm getting $100 taken out of my bank account to fill my car. Yeah. Well, you know, in another generation, they're going to be the curse we're fighting against because they're going to wonder what they're going to do with all the cobalt from the batteries. Okay. Can I just very quickly say, Dr. Peter Ridd made the point the other day to me. Apparently, Australia's already at net zero. If you look at all the trees in Australia, we take care of our country, and it's kind of funny because it's like, no offense, I know we're in a church. You bastards tried to indoctrinate me in school. I'm only 26. I know what the education is. You're trying to make it sound like Australia's the dirtiest country in the world. It's like, excuse me, we're at net zero. We put like half of a percent of the world's emissions out, and we've got so many trees, so much land. You know, go moralize to China. You know, go moralize to India. You know, we've got plenty of resources, and I'm glad that One Nation's sticking up for those industries. So yeah.
Yes. Now, you had a hard stop. Are you okay for another 5 minutes? This lady... Oh, sorry, is there someone over here first? Put your hand up so we can see if you want a question. This lady here. The one at the back. Get ready to put your hand up again.
This is to Jamal because I have... Yeah, Joel, sorry.
Call me Jamal, JJ, that's fine.
Yeah, JJ. I received from you today your email about giving information about every single electorate, and you could find out the preferences of those people. I just wondered how many people here know that they have your website to go to, because the preference votes is what happened in the federal election, isn't it? So many people chose People for Freedom, but the problem was those people, their preferences went to Labor or Liberal or Greens. So we don't want that this time. So do people know? And which are you, the lower house or the upper house?
I'm not a candidate. I just dress like one. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll try and quickly cover that because I obviously want to hear from Tanya before she has to go. Victoria just had a recent by-election in Narrabeen. They had 5 freedom parties that ran with similar policies to One Nation. We were all on the same page. They all came out with an average of 5% each. That's 25.5% of the vote. They should have picked one candidate. They should have gotten behind them, someone like Pietro, and they should have just run a campaign and gotten behind that one person. So they've had a wake up call. Now I've had a lot of a role in making sure that, for example, in seats like this, we don't get other parties run here, like the Liberal Democrats and others, because why do that? Why split the vote 5 ways when we've got one? So that's the first thing. I am coming up with a resource which shows you how the different parties are preferencing each other. particularly the left-wing ones, so you know, oh, okay, Sustainable Australia, Upper House, you're actually a shill for Labor, so that you have that sort of information. But with regards to what Mark Latham is doing in not preferencing other parties, there's a very good argument to do it. In this state, we have voluntary preferential voting. A lot of people don't follow the how to vote cards. And I hope Mark doesn't mind me saying this, but he had a particularly entertaining conversation with the Nationals in front of me where they said, well, do you reckon we can do some preferences? And Mark said, what, while we've got kids in Coffs Harbour having this indoctrination, when are you going to stand up? And he said, no way, not while this is going on. And I had enormous respect when I saw that from him, and I understood why he was doing it. No compromise with this. But as a voter, as a Turning Point Australia, it's in my interest to make sure that first and foremost, parties that we agree with have the balance of power. And so my recommendation is, if you're in this seat and you want to vote One Nation, I strongly recommend letting your vote flow to other parties. And you're more than welcome to see our policy matrix at tpaust.com.au. You'll see which parties have your values and go from there. But yeah, absolutely.
Can I just say that One Nation doesn't have a candidate in every single electorate, as is the case in Swansea. But I have to put it out there that you can vote One Nation in the upper house. And that's where we can make a real difference. So it's not that you don't have a candidate. You do have a candidate in every electorate in New South Wales. We can vote for One Nation in the upper house, okay? Great that we have Pietro here, and he's from Wallsend. Stand up, Pietro. This man, you know, I want to honour this guy because, you know, he supported me incredibly, and the guy just works his tail off for good, and he's a Christian, and he's with One Nation in Wallsend. And, you know, if you're over from that way, or if you know people from over that way, vote for this guy. He's a top guy. And he's not going anywhere tonight. Strongest Labor seat in the state. Well, we're going to turn that around, mate. We're praying, yeah, we're praying. So pray for Pietro that he gets a real turnaround in Wallsend. Okay. Another question?
I just want to say quickly to that though. So when you're voting, you obviously know that you've got the Legislative Assembly, so your local seat where you live, your lower house. That will be... you know, for most people here, it's either going to be Labor, Liberal, or Nationals. Okay, and so I think we're in Swansea. Is that right? Am I in the seat of? Where are we now? Are we in Wyong? Okay, around the corner. So I don't know where most people are from, but Wyong. Okay, it's already got a sitting Labor MP. Same with Swansea. Okay, obviously I'm going to encourage all of you not to vote Labor, but. The reality is these are pretty safe Labor seats, okay? I'm going to be honest. It's like what I tell people in Bankstown, you're in a safe Labor seat. But where you can make a difference is the upper house, okay? Everybody can make a difference in the Legislative Council vote. So that's that big white paper. That is where your vote matters, okay? And it's really important if you want to get someone like Colin up, that we vote One Nation. I have to be very clear about that because if you get really, that's right, column Q, if you become confused or if you try and start preferencing all over the place in the upper house, you can actually make your vote invalid, okay? It's really, you've got to be really, really careful how you vote with the Legislative Council. Above the line, really simple one vote. To me, it's really simple One Nation because Mark Latham's picked the right team this time. It's been he's picked the right team last time, but it's an amazing team this time of a good group of people that I think will represent New South Wales really well. We've got great people in the lower house, like Petro as well, but also in the upper house. So there are a lot of people running in the upper house, but the reality is, for the right, okay, but the reality is they're not going to get up. Okay, particularly if you don't have a group and you're not grouped up at the top and you don't have a name, it's unlikely. When you look at some of the blog sites from Anthony Green, he's made it very clear that since groups have come in and group type of voting, it's very difficult to elect somebody below that line. So I know there are people that might want to see some of those individuals elected. The harsh reality of the numbers that they need, it's very, very difficult. So we don't want to lose our vote potentially ending up with another Labor person or another Greens person by default because your vote might go nowhere. That's what we're worried about, is that people will try and sort of jump around and put all these names down, and in the end, the winners will be the Greens will pick up another vote, okay, or Labor will pick up another vote. And the Liberals have put a whole bunch of left-leaning people on their ticket, okay? And then we don't have that balance of power in the House of Review. The Legislative Council is going to be so critical. If you have a Labor-Greens coalition in the lower house, which is what their polls are now saying is going to eventuate, okay, remember, the Labor Party only needs 5 seats to turn, okay, in New South Wales to form a coalition. They then do a deal with the Greens, which they already have, and they form government. Okay, it's that tight. This election is down to the wire. Okay, so that is why the message that Mark Latham, One Nation, has been saying from the get-go is you've got to worry about the other chamber as well. You've got to worry about that House of Review, the Legislative Council, where we can put the handbrakes on the woke nonsense that will potentially be moved in the lower house. Okay? One Nation, Group Q, okay? Group Q, because it'll flow down to our ticket, okay? One vote. Because remember, this is New South Wales state. It's not federal. You only have to vote for one, okay? It's optional preferential. To make your vote valid, one vote. One in Group Q for One Nation. Okay, and that flows above the line. Make sure you're doing it above the line. So you'll see the groups above the line. It's a long white sheet and all these names on the bottom. Don't try and put the numbers next to the names.
If you vote below the line, it's an informal vote if you've already voted above the line.
Yeah, you'll have to vote a certain number to make it formal.
You have to vote
okay?
15 below the line.
And that can get complicated if you accidentally make an error. And you know, when they scrutinise these, there are people that are going to be trying to stop your vote, okay? Because they go back into the warehouses, they go through machines, and there's scrutineers for the major political parties trying to knock out your vote, okay, and trying to get it back to their people. So that's why I say to you that there's a team already in One Nation, Colin at number 4. We're desperately trying to get Colin up, okay, and it's just Group Q.
We had a couple of questions over here, didn't we? Yes, sir.
Yep. My wife and I have been jolted into activism over the last couple of years, given the state of the nation.
We all have been.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I just wonder, given the complicity of the press with the narrative, and their inability to report anything in terms of demonstrations and mass assemblies by the general public, as is our right. I'm just wondering how effective are these large rallies. There was millions down in Canberra. We went to that. We went to all the Newcastle rallies. We've been to Sydney rallies, outside mainstream media buildings, etc., etc. I just wonder from each of you people as to how effective you think that is, and also when we're not doing that, we're signing submissions and sending in reports against the renewable energy zones and all the rest of it. Is it? I mean, it makes you feel good, but does it do anything?
Well, take heart because I heard statistics just the other day that 12 months ago, about 40% of voters were still rusted on to their major party, okay? In 12 months, we've seen a miracle, because in 12 months, that number has dropped to 20%. So there's 20% of voters are not voting this time for the major parties. So your rallies, I was in Canberra, and the 200 people that were there. Yeah, that's what I mean. And I'm sure that many others here were. But Joel had something you wanted to say. Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a time and place for rallies. There was a time I prefer when it's illegal to be at a rally, and I've copped a lot of flack, anti-terrorism, coming after the organisers and all of that sort of thing. But Sorry, is that Tanya heading off? Or I was going to say, with regards to the rallies, there was a time for that. It was actually successful, especially the Canberra rallies. I did a whole 2-hour discussion with Graham Hood after that, 2 weeks after, and I went through 30 good news stories about all the things dropping. For example, the WA border opened up immediately after that. We got a ton of mainstream coverage we hadn't gotten before. We had the South Australia Police Union come against mandates. We had a Queensland university go against mandates as well, saying that their students are allowed to come. There was a ton of good news stories, but we didn't cover it because we thought that, some people set bad expectations that we were going to abolish the government or something. Not realistic. But what we did see was astonishing. So you are absolutely right. In the meantime, it's about elections. It's about fighting on the playing field that we're on right now. And that includes getting your vote right. And this is my real ballot. I'm sorry about the commotion. And I thought that I'll just pass the mic on. But this is the real ballot if you want to see exactly where Group Q is for One Nation. And as Tanya was saying, just vote One Nation and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, Tanya has to go, but we'll just take a couple more questions. So is there someone else over here?
Thank you. I think rallies, as you say, are important. There's a time and place for them. As far as submissions go, they certainly work. When you looked at the religious discrimination legislation for New South Wales, 20,000 people submitted their vote to the survey. 192 formal submissions were made, and the Parliament took note. The other thing to look at, can you just hang on to that? Thank you, is the parliamentary petitions. I have used paper petitions and parliamentary petitions to great use. This one is to support the religious freedom legislation that was voted down. We need 20,000 people to sign this electronically. Why 20,000? 20,000 is the magic number that triggers a debate in Parliament. So if 20,000 people from New South Wales all vote and all support this electronic petition, so if you can sign it, share it on your social media, send it via email, copy the flyers if you want, and there's some more at the back table, then we get to trigger a debate in Parliament, and it has to be discussed. So they're the things. I've been using petitions effectively now for 5 years, and I've managed to get a number of projects in my area because of tenacity and just using things that work, like petitions.
Okay, one more question. Tanya has to go, so look.
Cole.
And Michael's driving, so...
Cole, can I just ask yourself...
So me and Joel will stay behind and do the late shift.
Cole, can I just ask you and Tanya a quick question?
Oh, there he is.
How many... I've got the microphone that's bigger than a Land Cruiser. Look at it. How many positions vacant have you got right now for people to man polling stations?
Well, that was one thing I was going to say. Can we have this question first, and then I'll ask that question.
Tanya, you're obviously pro-life, and I thank God for you. We're in the midst of supporting the Babies Born Alive bill, and I feel that there's a thing that more people need to understand about, where so many babies are born after attempted abortion and are left to die on the operating room floor without any form of help, any form of palliative care. And if we did that to dogs, the RSPCA would be involved. So I honour you for your stance, and I thank you for that. I'm sure you will have had an awful lot of pushback in your time in the Labor Party for being honourable to that. I'm wondering how you stand with One Nation. Are they happy to support you in your ability to stand for pro-life?
Well, absolutely. One Nation, Mark reached out to me knowing exactly how I voted on that bill. And obviously I work closely with him and One Nation with religious freedom. So I have felt with One Nation that I have enormous amount of freedom to advocate in this space. And that's been made very clear to me both by the New South Wales parliamentary leader and indeed by the federal parliamentary leader, by Pauline herself. So I think I have never had that kind of support with the Labor Party. We did have a conscience vote in the Labor Party, so it's unfair to me to say that. I can't say that we were stopped in that regard. We won't. Okay, so we had a conscience vote, but you were generally just ostracised by your colleagues. Okay, and made fun of, and made a mockery of, and they would whisper in the corridors when you walk past. So there's just no support within the Labor Party for people of faith. I keep saying this, and I say this to people in southwest Sydney that naturally want to vote for major political parties. Like I'm delighted that up here people are starting to question major political parties and what they stand for. That's not happening yet in southwest and western Sydney. I mean, Joel knows that, Michael knows that, but they need to. They need to, particularly in those communities where they're often very strong in their faith, and yet they don't realise what the major political parties stand for. So thank you for those encouraging words. I really appreciate it, but I feel very happy where I am with One Nation in that regard. And just very quickly, in terms of volunteers, we have plenty of need for volunteers, okay? We're a smaller party. When you look at the major political parties like the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, they bus in volunteers from everywhere, okay? They pay people to be volunteers. And often the unions also send all their trade union officials to help out with the Labor candidates, okay? And they're getting paid to be there. So One Nation is in desperate need of volunteers because we need people who really want to volunteer and help, okay? We can't afford to pay people. You're not supposed to even legally do that. But we are desperate for volunteers. I know Pedro would love some volunteers in Wallsend, and I know Colin can organise if people are willing to volunteer either from Saturday onwards at pre-poll or, yes, there's a piece of paper, I understand, on the outside where you can write down your details and just say what time or where you're available next week. Pre-poll's open all week, Monday to Friday. And it's Saturday as well, 9 to 6, but it's also open all next week, okay? Thursday even up to 8 p.m. And every electorate has 2 or 3 locations for early voting, and then on the day itself there's about 20 booths, mostly your local schools and your community centres and churches become polling places. So if you are able to even spare a couple of hours, that would be great.
And also, there's some One Nation how to votes out there. Tony, is that right? Just general flyers. Okay, all right. I'd like to pray. Is that okay? Before we go, we really need the Lord at this time to save us and our nation. But I just want to say quickly before we do that let's not despair, okay? Because in the midst of all this darkness, there's light. And God will provide a way for us to get through. I know that with all my heart. And He's the one that gives us victory. And so do you mind if we pray? Father, I just pray for all of these people here tonight. I thank you, Lord, for Lord, bringing these people out, and Father, for the concern that they have for our state and indeed our nation. And Lord, I just pray, Father, that you would lead and guide, Lord, those pens and pencils, Lord, as people go to the polling booth, my God. Lord, to put their ticks in the right places, my God. So we thank you, Lord, for your goodness. We acknowledge you, Lord, tonight, that you are the one who leads and guides us. And Lord, the word says that a man plans his way, but the Lord orders his steps. And so, Father, we pray that you would do that, Lord, this time around in Jesus' name. And help there to be a real turnaround, Father. In the mighty name of Jesus we pray. Amen. And I shared here on Sunday preaching, but I mentioned Nancy Wake. Has anyone ever heard of Nancy Wake? She's an Australian hero in France, and she fought against the Germans and worked with the French underground. They had an overwhelming problem to deal with, and they were outnumbered. The Germans had really taken over, and anyone who's German, no offence, but I'm just saying that at that time they stood up and the Allies won that war. So please don't despair. God always causes us to have the victory, and we always win.
So let's not get our eyes on the negatives. Let's keep our eyes on the positives. Thank you for the work, obviously, that you guys have done in attending rallies and these kinds of things, and keep doing it. It's our right to do that, and we have a right to do that. So as you go your way tonight, look, we thank you so much for being here and hearing us out. Whether you agree or disagree, well, God bless you. And, we pray that God will lead you and guide you in this next week or week and a half as we lead up to this election. And thank you if you can volunteer. Appreciate that so much. So God bless you and good night. Thank you so much.